Straight ahead on Law and Crime Daily. A suspect in the murder of a teen pleads guilty nearly 23 years later. The investigation, the wrongful conviction, and now justice.
We are looking forward as a family to healing.
Day 2 of the second Trump impeachment trial. An attorney for one of the Capitol riot suspects responds to the Law and Crime Network.
Do me a huge favor and scan that and send it to me. I'll be the first one to shove it right up my rectum.
Plus, the Zoom Kitten mishap at a court hearing that everyone's talking about.
I'm here live. I'm not a cat.
Law and Crime Daily covering court cases from coast to coast. Welcome everyone to Law and Crime Daily. I'm Brian Buckmeyer along with Terry Austin. Genetic genealogy helped catch a suspected killer after the wrong man was in prison for nearly 20 years. Now, the Idaho man is pleading guilty.
Gosh, what a wonderful, bright young woman that was taken from us.
18-year-old Angie Dodge was found raped and murdered in her Idaho Falls apartment in June 1996.
I was brought in to show him some pictures and identify. My mom was in the adjacent room, and I went in and told her, I said, yeah, she's gone, Mom. She is gone.
Police caught their suspect, 20-year-old Christopher Tapp. Tapp's DNA wasn't a match, but he confessed and gave police the names of other suspects thought to have been involved too. Their DNA didn't match either.
You just want to do whatever it is to go away, to get yourself out of that little interrogation room, to get yourself away from these people that are supposed to be protecting you and they're not.
A jury convicted Tapp nonetheless, and he spent the next 20 years in prison. Angie's mother, Carol, says she did not believe Tapp was her daughter's real killer.
She spent hours upon hours watching all the interrogations and going over polygraphs and everything else, and she truly came on board to be my champion of justice. The most important person in the world, in my opinion, saw that I was innocent.
The Idaho Innocence Project took on Tapp's case. He was released in 2017 and exonerated in 2019. Investigators teamed up with Parabon Nanolabs to use genetic genealogy to find the real killer.
And in this case, we were fortunate to find 3 genetic networks, is what I call them. 3 different groups of people sharing DNA with the suspect that have common ancestors in their trees. And they all converged at one couple. So we knew that the suspect had to be descended from that couple. But he didn't appear in the paper records and the traditional research. He didn't appear in obituaries. And so we originally had it narrowed down to about 6 men, but it turned out there was a 7th, and that was Brian Drips.
DNA from a discarded cigarette to Brian Drips. Police learned Drips lived across the street from Angie at the time she was murdered. 5 days after the match, they had their killer in custody.
His DNA matches the DNA sample left at the scene of the crime, and he has also confessed to the crime in an interview of both rape and murder.
Prosecutors reached a deal with Drips, 20 years in prison, in exchange for his guilty plea.
So I went over there with the intent to just rape her. I was pretty high on cocaine and alcohol. I had a pocket knife with me. I just remember for an altercation just a stab upside my head. I didn't mean to murder her. I didn't think I did, but I guess it happened.
For the Dodge family, this meant a final conclusion.
It's been a burden that we've carried for a long time. It's been 25 years since we lost my Aunt Angie. We are looking forward as a family to healing and to writing the next chapter of our lives.
The plea is contingent on the judge's acceptance. Drips will be formally sentenced on April 27th. Joining us today to break down the case of Angie Dodge is defense attorney Eklund Mercy and Terry Austin. Eklund, while headlines will of course focus on Drips pleading guilty and the victim here, Angie Dodge, who was raped and murdered, what about Christopher Tapp, who at the time was 20 years old and had about 20 years of his life stolen by investigators, prosecutors, and the court?
Essentially, there was 2 victims because Mr. Tapp essentially died that day. I don't know if you know, but as a criminal defense attorney, having being prosecuted and convicted of rape is like a death sentence in prison. So I do believe that there were 2 victims and he should pay for 2 victims. The simple fact that he had to be free, he was allowed to be free, and no investigators went across the street and checked the neighbor. Heads should roll, badges should be snatched, and people should pay. People should pay.
Like literally across the street. How crazy is that? But Terry, A part of this also kind of warms my heart to some degree. The man who committed the crime has finally been brought to justice, partly because an unlikely hero, or an angel, I think is a proper word, the victim's mother. Can you tell us how she helped to bring closure and justice?
Well, you know, sometimes I think a mother does know best. I mean, she really wanted to find out who killed her daughter, and she did not think that Christopher Tapp, even though he confessed to the crime, she didn't think that he did it. She watched all of the interrogation tapes. I think she probably read from the, actions of the individuals who were being interviewed. And she kept at it. She worked with the Innocence Project. And ultimately, they did determine that someone else's DNA was at that scene. And they did ultimately convict the right person. So I think, sometimes you have to listen to the relatives because they do know better.
20 years late, but it seems that justice has been found, at least for most involved in this story. Thank you both. And now the news out of Idaho Falls doesn't end there. A police officer is on administrative leave after apparently shooting and killing a man in his own backyard while mistaking him for a fleeing suspect. Police Chief Bryce Johnson said law enforcement pulled over a vehicle Monday morning when an occupant fled. A deputy relayed the information to neighboring units, and officers encountered a man with a gun. The chief was vague in his description of what happened, but said the officer struck the man who succumbed to his injuries. The man was not the suspect who had fled, but actually the resident of the home. Still ahead on Law and Crime Daily, the shocking statement the attorney for the so-called QAnon Shaman had to say to Law and Crime. But first, day 2 of the second Trump impeachment trial, we take you inside the Senate chamber for the latest arguments. Stay with us. In the second day, House impeachment managers are arguing their case for the conviction of former President Donald Trump in the attack on the Capitol. As Angenette Levy tells us, Democrats say President Trump knew there would be violence on January 6th.
6 Republican senators actually joined Democrats in voting to allow this proceeding to move forward.
Stop the steal! Stop the steal! Stop the steal!
Lead impeachment manager, Congressman Jamie Raskin, showed tweets from the president in which he says Trump excused the violence and said this is what happens when an election is stolen. Raskin repeatedly called the stolen election claim, quote, the big lie. Trump's tweets and speeches from before and after the election were displayed to make the case for conviction.
The evidence will show you that he saw it coming and was not remotely surprised by the violence. And when the violence inexorably and inevitably came as predicted and overran this body and the House of Representatives with chaos, we will show you that he completely abdicated his duty as commander-in-chief to stop the violence and protect the government and protect our officers and protect our people. He violated his oath of office to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution, the government, and the people of the United States.
And this wasn't just some random guy at the neighborhood bar blowing off steam. This was our commander-in-chief.
But Trump's lawyers argue the entire proceeding is unconstitutional. They say it's about keeping the former president from running again.
With this trial, you will open up new and bigger wounds across the nation. For a great many Americans see this process for exactly what it is: a chance by a group of partisan politicians seeking to eliminate Donald Trump from the American political scene and seeking to disenfranchise 74 million plus American voters and those who dare to share their political beliefs.
The trial will continue on Thursday, but a conviction is unlikely. Many Republican senators have already said they'll vote against conviction because they don't believe a former president can be impeached. For Law and Crime Daily, I'm Angenette Levy.
Thanks, Angenette. An attorney for the so-called QAnon Shaman has offered his client to testify during the impeachment. Senior investigative reporter Adam Klasfeld asked him to admit that the conspiracy theory is a lie on his new podcast, Objections.
Your client was also known as QAnon Shaman. So if he were here today, would he be able to go up in front of people and say, QAnon was a lie. There is no elite cabal of Democratic Satanists that is persecuting Donald Trump and eating babies. Would he be able right now to renounce those beliefs that he was known and that prosecutors allege he was a leader of?
Yeah, I haven't seen any prosecutorial allegations that my client was a leader of that.
It was in the government memo. Just wanted,
Yeah, well,
that's what I'm quoting from.
do me a huge favor and scan that and send it to me. I'll be the first one to shove it right up my rectum if I haven't already seen it. And I'll do it on public TV. I've got no qualms about that. I'll own it. Can my client sit here and renounce what you're saying he should renounce? Yeah, very easily.
I mean, I'm curious if we can do this on Law and Crime Daily, but I don't think the network will allow us. But back to discuss the QAnon Shaman and trial to remove the impeached former president is defense attorney Eklund Mercy and co-host Terry Austin. Eklund, I've said some pretty colorful things in court, but this one takes the cake. What was your reaction to Attorney Watkins' statements?
I just think that the inability of, America's inability to hold rich white men accountable is ultimately going to be its downfall. And he has taken it as a joke. This wasn't just a regular crime. This wasn't streaking. This was treason against the United States government. And to take it as a joke and say, while your client is while your client is in custody for this treason and saying putting things up his rectum, he is taking this as a joke, and it is not. So I have a problem with it. I have a problem with his attitude, and it should be checked.
I agree. Now, Terry, the House impeachment managers played never-before-seen security footage of the insurrection, arguing there's a connection between Trump's words leading to the insurrection. How did you think the arguments are going?
I think the House managers have done an amazing job so far. They're talking about there was the big lie, there's the attack, there's the damage that was done after the fact. And they started out with the video showing Trump's tweets connected to the actions of the rioters. And this latest video, and this was presented by Delegate Stacey Plaskett, she in fact is showing what was going on inside the House from different angles. And you can actually feel the tension. It's palatable and it's frightening. And I think it was an excellent way to demonstrate to all of the Senate, but particularly those Republicans who have not yet been convinced.
Of course, arguments are going to continue in the next coming days. We'll make sure to keep an update for you as they roll out. Coming up on Law and Crime Daily, Bruce Springsteen arrested for DUI, but we're only learning about it months later. Plus, why correction officers in Minnesota are claiming discrimination over the guarding of ex-cop Derek Chauvin. The lawsuit next. Two men accused of murdering a legendary San Francisco private eye will remain behind bars without bail. Jack Palladino died last week after falling during a struggle with the men near his home. He had worked with former President Bill Clinton, Harvey Weinstein, and Kevin Costner. Attorneys for one of the men charged, Lawrence Thomas, asked that he be released and placed on home incarceration with his grandmother. But the judge said that Thomas and Ty Joan Flournoy posed a risk to public safety. They'll be back in court next week. A former Ohio police officer charged with murdering an unarmed black man is free on bail. Adam Coy shot Andre Hill in Columbus last December. A magistrate had set Coy's bail at $3 million last week, but a judge lowered it to $1 million, and Coy posted it. Coy has pled not guilty to the charges. His lawyers claimed he believed a set of keys that Hill was holding was a silver revolver. A new lawsuit filed regarding the George Floyd case. Terry Austin has the allegations correction officers are raising regarding ex-cop Derek Chauvin.
Brian, 8 officers are suing Ramsey County, saying they were segregated from the former Minneapolis police officer because they are people of color. Derek Chauvin was arrested for the death of George Floyd on May 29, 2020. He was taken to the Ramsey County Adult Detention Center. The plaintiffs say the superintendent did not think they could be trusted to guard him due to their race. They claim they were discriminated against when they were told they could no longer work on the 5th floor where Chauvin was being housed. They alleged they experienced humiliation and distress.
So, Terry, essentially this is an employment discrimination case brought by these 8 correction officers. Do you think they have a good chance at winning their case?
They have an excellent chance of winning their case. The fact that they were asked not to work on that floor just because they were people of color, it is an insult. And in many ways, it's an, demotion because they were asked to move to another floor, and the original floor was really being held for those prisoners who were sort of high profile. So they can claim that they were discriminated against, they can claim that they were insulted, they can claim they're demoted, and also that it was a hostile work environment. So I think they have a very good chance of winning the suit.
Yeah, and the concept of the belief that you can't do your job or fulfill your duties because of the color of your skin is disgusting and ridiculous in all ways. So of course I hope that they are winning that argument down the road. Thank you, Terry. When we come back, a virtual court hearing gone awry. The Zoom filter accidentally left on, the attorney, not to be confused with a kitten, and what the judge overseeing the case had to say. You don't want to miss it. Jails and prisons have been known hotspots for COVID-19 since the start of the pandemic. Chief investigative correspondent Brian Ross is digging into where they fall on priority lists with the rollout of the vaccine.
Thanks, Brian. This week on Brian Ross Investigates, the long line for the COVID-19 vaccine and tough questions about who should go to the head of the line. Should professional athletes get their shots first? What about people behind bars, including the accused 9/11 terrorist at Guantanamo?
Even in prison settings, we're not condemning everybody to death. We're not saying, because you were convicted of embezzlement or driving a getaway car, your life isn't going to be protected. The combination of that plus protect the community. One of the biggest outbreaks, Brian, in the U.S. so far is in rural Michigan. And I know why it's there. It's because that's where the state prison is.
We're joined by the country's leading medical ethics expert, Dr. Arthur Kaplan.
Watching the mutation rate on this virus, which is going faster than I thought it was going to, nobody's safe until we tamp it out everywhere.
That's this week on Brian Ross Investigates. Brian?
Thanks for the update, Brian. Rock legend Bruce Springsteen was arrested on suspicion of driving under the influence in New Jersey. TMZ first reported on the arrest, which happened in November of 2020. A spokesperson for the National Park Service said Springsteen was cooperative. The musician was taken into custody in the Gateway National Recreation Area on the New Jersey coast. He was cited for DUI, reckless driving, and consuming alcohol in a closed area. It might be a rocky road to justice for the next accused suspect. Terry Austin is here to tell us about the sticky situation.
Brian, police say a man in New York City stole 8 pints of ice cream, but the getaway didn't go exactly as planned. According to the NYPD officers who responded to a burglary in progress at a CVS in East Harlem. When they arrived, the suspect ran, climbed over a fence, and not realizing how far the drop was, had to cling onto a ledge. Authorities say they were able to bring him down safely and arrest him. Cartons of Haagen-Dazs were reportedly found in his backpack. He faces charges of petty larceny and criminal possession of stolen property.
What a great story. Another instance going viral on the internet. An attorney in Texas couldn't figure out how to turn off the filter on his camera during a court hearing on Zoom. If you haven't seen it yet, take a look.
Mr. Ponton, I believe you have a filter turned on in the video settings. You might want to take
we're
a look.
trying to, can you hear me, Judge?
I can hear you. I think it's a filter.
It is, and I don't know how to remove it. I've got my assistant here. She's trying to, but I'm prepared to go forward with it. I'm here live. I'm not a cat.
Lawyer Rod Ponton was appearing for a civil forfeiture case. He was able to turn the filter off, and they returned to business as usual. Judge Roy Ferguson posted on Twitter after the hearing, important Zoom tip. If a child used your computer before you joined a virtual hearing, check the Zoom video options to be sure filters are off. This kitten just made a formal announcement on a case in the 394th. Back meow one last time to talk Zoom mishaps is Eklund Mercy and Terry Austin. Eklund, great advice by the judge about checking Zoom settings. What did you think when you first saw this?
It was perfect. I'm sorry. Oh, listen, he tried so hard. I'm sorry. It was.
I mean, the best part for me, Eklund, was I'm not a cat. We can go forward.
No, you can't.
Terry, same question. And do you have any potential Zoom mishaps that you've had over the last year?
Well, Brian, I've had many catastrophes on Zoom. Get it? Catastrophes? Okay. Listen, for all of us parents and grandparents, keeping up with technology is no easy task. I really think the judge handled the situation perfectly.
Yeah, I think at that point, just like Eklund is doing, you've got to laugh. I've known that I've had some of those as well. I know the ongoing joke for a lot of people who are on TV or attorneys who are doing this is asking the question, are you wearing pants? I know I had one judge ask me that question. I was like, Judge, I'm not quite sure if that's something you should ask, but I'm definitely going to plead the fifth. For our viewers, I'm definitely wearing my suit pants today. Terry, Eklund, this is a great way to end the show. Thank you very much. Eklund is still cracking up. Eklund, was this the first time you saw this? Guys, thank you for joining us here today at the Law&Crime Trial Network, here at the Law&Crime Daily, as we end on a great note and a bit of a laughter. Thank you for joining us here. We'll see you next time as we discuss justice in America.